Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show where we take a stack of sources, articles, research, our own notes, and extract the most important nuggets of knowledge or insight, giving you a shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today we're embarking on a deep dive into the remarkable, often tumultuous and endlessly fascinating journey of National Public Radio. We've been sifting through a treasure trove of insights from a source exploring NPR's history, right from its audacious beginnings to its role in the modern media landscape. Our mission really is to uncover the pivotal moments, the surprising characters, and the enduring principles that shape this unique institution.
Exactly. And this isn't just about, a radio network. It's a story about the constant challenges of creating something truly distinctive in media. It's about that inherent tension between, ambition and reality and what it really takes to stay relevant and trusted in an ever-changing world. Ultimately, it's a deep dive into how public broadcasting became such a major part of the American media landscape and maybe what lessons it holds for any organization trying to innovate and, last.
That sounds like a rich history to explore. So let's go all the way back. We're talking the early 1970s. Radio at the time was often seen as the aging and often overlooked progenitor of electronic mass communications. Kind of dusty, right? But it was about to undergo a revolution, and NPR was poised right at its forefront, ready to lead it. What was it about NPR's initial vision that made it so revolutionary?
Well, what truly set NPR apart right from the start was its unique approach to journalism. It was all about deep contextual storytelling, really driven by the human voice. That was the core idea. This vision, championed by figures like Bill Simmering, who himself grew up influenced by public radio's role in spreading wisdom beyond school boundaries, that genuinely defined its early ethos. He saw radio not just as a broadcaster, but as a seed broadcaster, for intellectual seeds, aiming for substance over sensationalism.
And their debut was certainly eventful, wasn't it? I mean, imagine this. NPR's flagship program, All Things Considered, set to debut May 3rd, 1971. What they couldn't have foreseen was that a massive anti-Vietnam War protest, the May Day Tribe, planned to shut down Washington, D.C. that very same day. 20,000 demonstrators hitting the streets. How did NPR handle that chaos for its very first broadcast?
Well, Simmering, with characteristic audacity, had this almost, insane idea for the premiere. A 21-minute documentary on the day's events produced in just a matter of hours from raw field audio, straight from the streets. The first host, Robert Conley, a former NBC and New York Times correspondent, he was so loose he basically winged it.
Yeah.
He was extemporizing for nearly 5 minutes on air before the documentary was even ready. He even padded for time, I think at one point explaining that Robert F. Kennedy Stadium was named for Senator Robert F. Kennedy. It really speaks to both the sort of entrepreneurial spirit and, frankly, the chaos of early startup media.
That debut sounds incredibly audacious for the time. What specifically made that initial broadcast so groundbreaking, beyond just the, raw audio? Was it the editorial stance or something else that truly set it apart?
It was a combination, really. The documentary itself was groundbreaking for its time, especially in its use of primary sources, multiple perspectives. You heard from demonstrators, police, even business people. It offered this capsule account of a historic day that Walter Cronkite maybe only gave a few minutes on CBS. Yet, despite a token effort at even-handedness, it had a clear viewpoint captured in that line. Today, in the nation's capital, it is a crime to be young and have long hair. So this debut, though chaotic, it truly showcased NPR's adventurous spirit. They were aiming for depth and flair compared to the glossy rut of TV news, and Simmering's prior experience at WBFO, broadcasting play-by-play of protests and inviting listeners on air as a force of reason, that really laid the groundwork for this unique journalistic style. He even had WBFO broadcasting, "This is radio, damn it," that kind of energy.
Okay, so from that bold, chaotic start, you might expect smooth sailing, right? But NPR's early years were anything but. Early on, station managers called their new child ugly, and broadcasts were erratic, often aired as much by dumb luck as design. What kind of turbulence did they face?
Oh, the initial financial struggles were severe. So severe they led to this desperate, ethically dubious undertaking by the troika of influential reporters Linda Wertheimer, Cokie Roberts, and Nina Totenberg. And this wasn't just ethically questionable. It reveals a crucial early tension. NPR staff, fiercely committed to journalistic independence, were willing to lobby the very officials they covered to intercede with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the CPB. They feared the CPB would restrict its journalistic independence, which they believed would mean the end of NPR. It kind of set a precedent for how far NPR might go to safeguard its unique vision when under, existential threat.
That's an incredible look into the power dynamics at play, even in those early days. Congressman Tim Worth, a future United States Senator, was reportedly jawboning the CPB on NPR's behalf. He even said, NPR was in the room with the authorities, but we were the big brother waiting out on the street. That's quite a statement. And then he escalated to threatening the CPB directly. This high-stakes game of chicken really highlights the precariousness of NPR's early existence, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And internally, things were often just as chaotic. There was this notable lack of editorial judgment. They used panic buttons, interstitial music all the time. One executive noted, nobody was exercising editorial judgment. Station managers complained that the network was airing stuff that exposed them to ridicule. Bill Simmering's visionary approach often clashed with staff expectations, leading to a lot of tension. There was this described mismatch between Bill's visionary view of how things ought to be and the very structured, inflexible expectations.
And the stories from this period really highlight that Wild West atmosphere. You have Doug Terry, a young reporter, former May Day protester himself, arrested for felony destruction of federal property during a protest. Yet he continued to broadcast, reportedly unrepentant about his anti-war views. And then there's Josh Darsa. He'd conducted the first American TV interview with the Beatles, right? But on air at NPR, he struggled, even showing up drunk, wearing a tricky Dick Nixon mask for a live broadcast, saying a line that apparently would have worked on late-night TV, but not at NPR. So how does an organization even begin to professionalize amid such, well, internal turmoil and external pressure?
It's a critical question, isn't it? The encounter sessions in the early 1980s, which were an attempt to recommit staff to NPR's mission, they tell us a lot about that struggle. They apparently devolved into these frenzies of name-calling, sobbing, and near fisticuffs with all the psychobabble phrases like, you've perimeterized your workplace. Seriously. The general counsel noted, there was a fury that someone would have unleashed this big, clumsy force. It was clearly a messy, painful process of trying to figure out what NPR was and wasn't, both journalistically and culturally.
And it was during this very tumultuous time that we start to see key figures emerge, like Susan Stamberg, a central host known for her attentive listening, her ham personality. She really broke ground for women in broadcasting. We also saw the beginnings of the Troika's influence as they battled for their vision of NPR, even to the point where veteran investigative journalist Barbara Newman was apparently walled in to an office, literally constructing walls due to staff dislike, then forced out. One staffer called it an Edgar Allan Poe approach to walling her in. The Troika apparently felt Newman's brashness was an obstacle to their careers. So it seems the organization was slowly, maybe painfully, coming to terms with itself.
Indeed, yeah. It was a period of intense internal negotiation and self-definition. You could really feel the growing pains.
Okay, so despite this rough, almost chaotic start, NPR did begin to forge its unique identity. It happened through landmark reporting and those iconic voices.
Yeah.
How did they start carving out that distinct identity that would eventually resonate with so many millions?
Well, the Watergate hearings in the mid-1970s proved to be a really pivotal moment. NPR's live, continuous coverage, with reporter Josh Darsa positioned as the sole on-air reporter in the hall with the senators, that was a complete game changer. It earned the network serious praise. One critic noted, only on public radio was there evidence of a brain and heart out there in Radioland. It was seen as a kind of mini documentary of an ongoing national tragedy, and it really proved their value for in-depth, thoughtful journalism.
That really does sound like a turning point. And then, a few years later, we saw the launch of Morning Edition in 1979, which, again, wasn't without its own initial hiccups, right? Like ignoring the Iran hostage crisis on its debut for features like Split Pea Soup Week. Apparently, the show's reporters even boycotted it on day one. But despite that rough start, it quickly established a beachhead in the American morning.
Yeah, and beyond the programming itself, the introduction of satellite broadcasting in the early 1980s was a true game changer technologically. It didn't just bring crisp live interviews, it fundamentally transformed NPR. It went from being a collection of sort of interconnected local stations into a truly cohesive national network. This technological leap basically altered their reach and allowed them to cover national events live and with unparalleled clarity. Listeners were apparently so astonished by the sound quality, they doubted guests were really in distant locales. They thought they must be in the studio. One listener even thought a male voice was Susan Stamberg because the sound was just so much clearer.
Wow. It's fascinating how NPR then cultivated unique talent to really capitalize on this new clarity. Bob Edwards became such a mainstay, didn't he? His distinctive baritone voice, his witty personality, they were transformative for Morning Edition. And the addition of the legendary baseball announcer Red Barber as a commentator, even though Edwards initially resisted live radio, that proved masterful. Barber's colloquial yet erudite style, his journalistic rigor, referring to Edwards as Colonel Bob, it greatly enhanced the show's appeal and, reportedly, Edwards' own confidence.
Absolutely. And NPR also distinguished itself with ambitious documentaries. Father Cares, that 1980 project on Jonestown, really showcased the unique power of radio. It relied heavily on audio from Jim Jones. The creator, James Reston Jr., realized it was listening that made the imagination run wild. He felt pictures constricted the event. This really reflected Bill Simmering's influence on innovative sound production, showing how radio could create this vivid, immersive experience purely through sound.
But the network also faced a surprising, maybe unsettling challenge during this period, a pervasive culture of drug use. According to one account, damn near everybody in the organization was doing coke, and was openly ordered over the intercom, even consumed on tape reels in editing booths. This raises a really crucial question about the unique environment of early media startups. I mean, how do you manage creative freedom against the need for responsible operation? Especially when executives like Frank Mankiewicz were aware, but didn't immediately crack down, apparently only wanting to know if anyone was dealing from the building. It was certainly a unique environment.
It absolutely was, yeah. And that uniqueness, with all its chaotic energy, it continued to define NPR's journey as they pushed into the 80s and 90s. They faced renewed financial crises and internal conflicts, even as the network was really establishing itself.
Tell us more about those renewed challenges. What happened next?
Well, Frank Mankiewicz's ambitious Project Independence, this plan to diversify revenue through data ventures, it ultimately failed. Big time. It led to a significant financial loss and his resignation. He apparently dismissed people who balanced budgets as having no dreams, didn't want his epitaph to be about a balanced budget. His successor, Ronald Bornstein, implemented extreme austerity measures. We're talking newsroom supply shortages, even toilet paper being delivered from CBS News listeners after a plea went out.
That's a stark image, wow. But public support was galvanized, right? There was a Save NPR campaign, driven by staff, including Linda Wertheimer's husband. The CPB's bailout eventually came, but with a catch: more control for CPB and a shift to funding stations directly, which really challenged NPR's central role. One CPB executive supposedly told NPR staff, all you have to do to assure that you're competitive is make the stations want your programming instead of Kling's, referring to a competitor. Talk about pressure.
Yeah, and this period also saw significant host changes. Susan Stamberg, such a core identity for All Things Considered, she stepped down due to breast cancer and, well, stress. Attempts to find her replacement were fraught. Figures like Margot Adler, described as a lusty Jewish witch from New York, were reportedly passed over, partly due to her Wiccan beliefs. And Jackie Judd, despite a promising partnership with Noah Adams, faced radio silence after Adams was poached by a competitor. It really highlights the challenges of maintaining talent in that environment.
And the editorial emphasis shifted too. Towards more hard-hitting news under foreign editors like Lauren Jenkins. He aimed to beat the New York Times on major stories and cut down on those long, soulful pieces. Wanted stories no longer than 8 minutes, apparently. This led to new clashes, didn't it? Notably with reporter Sunni Khalid, who later sued NPR and Jenkins for alleged insensitivity and discrimination based on his black male voice. Khalid asserted that the sound of the black male was not the NPR sound. That's a serious charge.
It is. And despite that internal friction, NPR's international coverage during this time was exceptional. You had Sylvia Poggioli's reports from Bosnia in '92 on refugee camps and ethnic cleansing. They were twice as long as normal ATC stories and led broadcasts, capturing these haunting voices of women forced to abandon their homes. Then Michael Skiller's harrowing accounts from Rwanda in '94 on the genocide, praised for witness bearing to a high level, describing bodies stacked by the side of the road and people chasing people with machetes. It demonstrated their continued commitment to impactful global reporting, even amidst internal strife.
The early 2000s brought new shocks, particularly 9/11. Morning Edition initially returned to a feature on Chicago schools after the first tower crash, which sounds jarring now. But under Ellen Weiss, the network quickly mobilized, didn't they? Covering the attacks without undue sensation, focusing on victims and destruction. Weiss apparently spent 5 days straight at the offices, making sure the network was focused on covering the victims, understanding who was affected, without making listeners more scared.
Yes, a crucial moment handled with journalistic care. Then the Iraq War saw Ann Garrels become the sole American broadcast journalist in Baghdad for a period, filing these critical, nuanced reports while other news organizations pulled out. Yet the immense pressures led to her own struggles with PTSD and alcoholism later on. And then new internal conflicts arose over reporting protocols and leadership as she clashed with newer reporters. It shows the personal toll of that kind of work.
The network also grappled with high-profile talent controversies around this time. Juan Williams, a conservative voice brought in, presumably to diversify perspectives. He was fired after making controversial comments about Muslims on Fox News. That led to a huge public outcry and internal email melees that seemed to expose a lack of genuine deliberation by NPR leadership. Williams himself believed they were just looking for a reason to get rid of me.
And this raises that important question again for any media organization, but especially a nonprofit like NPR. How do you balance that journalistic mission with external political pressures and internal cultural shifts? The Ron Schiller video in 2011, that Hidden Cameras Sting It, fueled those stereotypes of NPR as elitist and liberal intellectual. It led to renewed calls from Congress to defund the network. Even President Obama later joked about it at an event saying, "You guys are still here, that's good, I couldn't remember where we landed on that." It just highlights the perpetual tightrope walk public media navigates.
Indeed, a tightrope is a good way to put it. NPR has always navigated this tension between its foundational values and the demands of an evolving media landscape. The rise of digital technology, for instance, presented both challenges and opportunities.
Oh, definitely. One major challenge was the bypass issue. As NPR's digital presence grew, -npr.org, podcasts, it threatened local station fundraising because people could connect directly with the national brand. Ken Stern, a former CEO, was even fired partly for proposing to rename the network National Public Media and adding a direct donation button to npr.org. That would have bypassed the very stations it relied on for local funding. It was a non-negotiable issue for the board, which was, comprised of station managers. It shows that enduring tension between national reach and local support.
But perhaps one of the most significant evolutions, and certainly an opportunity that came out of NPR, can be seen in the story of Ira Glass in This American Life. He was a longtime NPR staffer, right, but harbored a contempt for the daily news shows, saw them as square. He left NPR, having been there off and on for 17 years, to create what became This American Life. This show that blended monologue and feature journalism. It became a piece of new journalism, taking life as its beat, without tabloid hype.
Exactly. And This American Life's success, which was bolstered by support from Public Radio International and later a significant grant from CPB, allowed it to grow financially and journalistically. Then Glass's decision to sell Serial Productions, which spun off from Tell-El to the New York Times for a reported $25 million, that solidified his status as a sort of homegrown multimillionaire. He achieved both autonomy and profitability, acknowledging he wasn't necessarily trying to make money, but was glad for the safety net it provided. It really shows the potential for new forms of audio journalism to thrive, often adjacent to or even outside the original institution.
And yet, despite its celebrated status, its groundbreaking evolution, NPR continues to face scrutiny. Most recently, in 2024, a senior business editor, Yuri Berliner, published this essay. He accused NPR of abandoning its even-handed approach to the news and adopting a rigidly liberal view, leading to an audience skewed hard to the left. He argued that an open-minded spirit no longer exists within NPR, which of course sparked another huge debate.
It did. And looking back, this whole deep dive, it really reveals NPR as a testament to persistent vision, doesn't it? Surviving against improbable odds, constantly adapting. From that scrappy startup, almost crippled by financial woes and internal chaos, it evolved into this trusted source of in-depth journalism and innovative storytelling, winning multiple Peabody Awards along the way.
It truly is a story of pioneering spirits, difficult choices, and the enduring power of sound to capture truth and human experience. The ongoing debates, like those around bias or the balance between national and local interests, they are, in a way, part of its very fabric. They reflect that constant push and pull inherent in its mission.
Yeah, the journey of NPR really highlights the complex interplay between journalistic integrity, financial sustainability, and, of course, public perception. It's never been simple.
We hope this deep dive has given you a fresh perspective on a media institution that continues to shape how millions understand the world. And maybe consider this. In an age of unprecedented information flow and, frankly, increasing media fragmentation, how do we, as consumers and creators, ensure that the demand for depth, context, and diverse perspectives continues to thrive regardless of the platform? It's definitely a question worth pondering as the story of information continues to unfold.